2025 prediction time, and we're going to be going over my ATP Grand Slam predictions for 2025. So I'm going to be predicting each champion for each Grand Slam. I'll also be nominating a dark horse, and I'll also be talking about interesting storyline I think may happen during the tournament. Before you do get into it, though, remember to that like button, do subscribe if you're new, and do leave a rating or review if you're listening on a podcast platform. Thank you to all our listeners on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, especially. You guys are legends. Please do leave us a review. And if you're enjoying the show, then please do leave a 5-star rating review, even better. Also, shout out to our YouTube members. Thank you for supporting us as always. Okay, let's get into it then. So, 4 Grand Slams, of course: Australian Open, Roland Garros, Wimbledon, and the US Open. So we're going to start off with the Outback in Australia, the Australian Open, which is only, well, really around the corner. The only tournament, of course, before then is the Next Gen Finals, where some top young players will be taking part. By the way, it's stacked. However, we're going to look forward to the first Grand Slam of the year, and I'm going to talk about my interesting storyline first, and then I'll get into my dark horse and my champion. So the interesting storyline for me is going to be Nick Kyrgios coming back, and I think he's going to make the second week of the Australian Open on his Grand Slam comeback. Now, I'm not saying he's going to make the semi-finals or a final, but I do think he'll make the second week, so round of 16 or quarterfinals. I just have that feeling after seeing him back playing Casper Ruud in the UTS a few months back, and I know it's an exhibition tournament, but Ruud is very professional. He would have given close to his best anyway, I imagine. And Kyrgios came out and didn't seem to be breaking a sweat, really. A shorter format, of course. It's not a best of 3 or even best of 5 format. But the level I think that he showed, to me, was a real indicator that he's been putting in the work. Then, of course, had a longer layoff. I wasn't 100% certain with how his body was feeling after that exhibition. And now he goes into, hopefully, 2025 fit enough to start playing and competing at the biggest events, starting at the Australian Open. My dark horse is someone who has had a very strong end to the year. Now, in a lot of cases, I won't cater in strong end to the year and then expect it to transfer through into the start of the year. But I think for this particular player, it's not just been a fluke that he's had a good run of form again at the end of the year. I think it's more of a, let's say, a spark in the moment of the career that is Arthur Fils. Now, the Frenchman has had some great results at the end of this year, and he'll be playing in the Next Gen Finals as well. And I do think the young Frenchman will be a dark horse. I'm not saying he's going to win the tournament, but do not be surprised if he either beats some top players or he makes a deep run. He's going to be dangerous. And I do think as long as he stays fully fit, and of course, all these predictions will be generally, especially for champions and dark horses, will be with the assumption that the player is going to be injury free. I do think he's going to have a good chance at the Australian Open. He's been playing on some quick courts back end of this year and looked very comfortable. He seems to have a very all-round game, defends well, can attack well. We've seen his serve improve. He's pretty comfortable at the net as well, and defends well out of the backhand corner, which is always always important in men's tennis, that ad court battle. So yes, he's not at the level of maybe a Sinner and an Alcaraz and of course a Djokovic right now, but he is definitely improving and is making some really big steps towards starting to challenge in some of these major tournaments, in my opinion. My champion, well, I was torn here, to be honest. This Australian Open could be absolutely crazy. We are most likely going to have, and I think almost guaranteed, I think now, to have Sinner and Alcaraz in the same half of the draw with Sasha Zverev in the bottom half. And what that means is that Novak Djokovic could end up in Alcaraz and Sinner's half, where you'd have all three of them in one half, or you could have Djokovic in Zverev's half, which, and then it kind of evens up a little bit, you'd say. Now, given the fact that we know Zverev's going to avoid Sinner and Alcaraz until the final, a lot of people may go for him. Now, I've gone for Zverev. I think the last 2 years, I would say, at the Australian Open, I think, if I'm not mistaken, and every time I've been wrong. I think maybe the Australian Open or US Open, and he made another final this year at Roland Garros and lost to Carlos Alcaraz after being 2-1 up. And I actually did a video on whether he will ever win a Grand Slam. Now, I tend to yo-yo on this decision a lot myself. Maybe my more cynical side is telling me that he's not going to win a Grand Slam next year anyways. Whether it's his career remains to be seen, but not next year. And I think it's more of a mental block than the level. And I know he played a really good level at the Paris Masters and ATP finals, until he lost to Taylor Fritz. And again, that is a bit of the mental, because Fritz had beaten him 4 times at the back end of this year. And clearly has, 3 times before that match, and clearly has the upper hand now in the mental game when it comes to that rivalry and matchup. And on paper, Zverev should be winning that, you'd say. However, Fritz has definitely upped his game, but I think Zverev has definitely maybe been surprised and also found excuses as to why he's lost those matches against Fritz, and he's losing to players that maybe he would have expected not to in the past. But he's very capable of beating a Sinner or an Alcaraz at a slam, as he's shown after beating, for example, Alcaraz last year in the quarterfinals, or this year in the quarterfinals of the Australian Open, which actually takes me to another interesting storyline before we get into my champion, which I'm going to keep you guys on the hook for. So another interesting storyline for me is going to be Carlos Alcaraz. Can he make it past the quarterfinal stage? He's never made it past the quarterfinal stage. In fact, only this year did he make his first quarterfinal, losing to Zverev. And, he has really driven home the desire to win the career Grand Slam, which is all 4 titles, of course, at some point in your career. And the only one missing from his collection is the Australian Open. And he mentioned that in an exhibition recently, and I think he'll be definitely going for it full force and be putting in the necessary preparations to really give himself the best shot. However, I do think it's the worst surface out of all 4 Grand Slams for his game, and I don't think he's going to win it this year coming. So I think he'll probably make it to the semi-final stage and lose to Jannik Sinner, who I think will be the eventual champion. Now, of course, some big question marks. I'm making these predictions based on the fact that he's not going to be banned, or at least not banned for a substantial amount of time that will affect the outcomes of these results. But we don't know, of course. We don't know what's going to happen with that. He could very easily be banned for a very long period of time and then not end up playing much throughout the year. And then actually it opens up even more for the likes of Zverev and maybe even Ruud and Tsitsipas and Rublev and Rune and all these guys, right, who haven't won slams. Medvedev has won a slam, but he's looking to win another one. He's been struggling against Sinner and Alcaraz, and it really will open up, of course. And it might actually change the whole landscape of men's tennis in the short to medium term future, actually, if that were to happen. It'd give them more confidence, those other guys coming through, or other guys who haven't maybe had as much success as they would have liked in the past. But yeah, Jannik Sinner is my champion for the Australian Open. I think he'll go back-to-back, and he's definitely the best hardcourt player on the men's side, in my opinion. Won the Australian Open and US Open this year, ATP Finals, Davis Cup, to name a few titles, and I do think he'll win 3 hardcourt Grand Slams in a row. Roland Garros. So my interesting storyline is that Djokovic, that's Novak Djokovic, of course, will be at least one of Sinner and Alcaraz when he does play Roland Garros next year. Now, that's a pretty big call, you might say, but of course, against Alcaraz, I don't think is that big a call. He beat Alcaraz at Roland Garros last year in the semi-final stage, and then he also beat him at Roland Garros, not at Roland Garros, the French Open Grand Slam tournament, but he beat him at the Olympics in 2 tiebreak sets and really played some phenomenal tennis. And that is, of course, on the knee sleeve. You'd hope that his body is going to be even more rejuvenated than it has been towards the back end of this year. He's had some time off as well. He's going to be coached by Andy Murray, potentially past the Australian Open. I think he'll have a new lease of life. He'll be physically feeling better, and I think he'll give it his all. And I do think, despite the Australian Open being a tournament where he's won it 10 times, I do think Roland Garros, for me, could potentially be his best chance of winning a slam, because I do think you could argue that he's the best clay court player on the men's tour right now. And that sounds weird to say because he's had so much success at Wimbledon and the Australian Open, and even, to some degree, the US Open. But I actually think at this part of his career, and considering the other players on tour, I actually think he has a better chance at Roland Garros, in my opinion. Sounds crazy to say. The dark horse I'm going to go with is Holger Rune. Now, he needs to sort out his coaching team. He needs to sort out his playing style. It seems very confused. He doesn't quite know how he should be playing. However, he's made a quarterfinal of Roland Garros in the past. I do think he'll be able to make another run. It should just be a matter of time until he sorts out the coaching issue, his style of play, and also his body as well. I think in terms of his conditioning at these slams, and surely it just takes a few, maybe it takes a favorable draw, and it takes some bigger players dropping out in his section, quarter or half, for him to then make a really deep run. That's kind of how I see it for him, and he's a very talented player, and I'd be surprised if we don't see him make some sort of Grand Slam run in 2025. If he doesn't, in my opinion, I think it then spells some real big issues, and then you do start thinking, well, could he potentially have a career? And again, it's no offense to someone like Tsitsipas, but like a Tsitsipas, where you think, will he ever win a slam? Despite Tsitsipas making 2 Grand Slam finals and multiple semi-finals, but Holger Rune is only 21, but he hasn't had that really big Grand Slam moment where he's made a semi or made a final like some of the other players have. Zverev and Tsitsipas, and yes, they're older, but it's only going to get harder for Rune as he sees Sinner and Alcaraz continue to win titles. I'm telling you, it's only going to get harder. There's only one Novak Djokovic, and people think he's going to replicate what Djokovic did, when he looked at Nadal and Federer and then caught up, and it's possible, but it's very unlikely that that's going to be the same scenario. That's not to say Rune can't win more Grand Slams than Sinner and Alcaraz. It's just to say, if he's going to start replicating what these guys are doing, he has to do it sooner rather than later, in my opinion. So champion Djokovic, dark horse Rune, for me, for Roland Garros. Wimbledon, so I've got an interesting storyline, is Jack Draper. Now, he's never made it past the second round of Wimbledon, and I think he's going to make it at least to the quarterfinal stage. He had a really good 2024, and he actually won our award for most improved player of the year, our Quarter Shot Tennis Awards, and it was deserved, that's for sure. Look, I mean, he has a mean lefty serve, that slice serve out wide from the ad side. He's got a lot of power from the back of the court with the forehand. The flat backhand is very potent on the grass. He's got a decent slice and drop shot, and then also he's got a pretty comfortable net game. His serve, as we know, I mentioned the slice serve, but it's also a real weapon, and his return is much improved. So he's got the right elements, I think, to succeed on grass, and we saw that when he won a title on grass this year. Also beat Carlos Alcaraz on grass. So Alcaraz went on, of course, to win Wimbledon. So, I do see him making some big strides. And my dark horse for the tournament is going to be himself, so Jack Draper or Nick Kyrgios. And I think by this time in the year, Kyrgios would have had a lot of tennis played, hopefully. A lot of matches under his belt, and I do think it's then time for him to start making some moves. And of course, we know that he's made the Wimbledon final before, losing to Novak Djokovic. This could be, he's already said he's not going to have many more years potentially in the sport, at least on tour playing. So I imagine he's going to go full throttle at these tournaments, especially a tournament like Wimbledon, where he knows he's got a good chance with the weapons he has at his disposal. An all-time great serve. The variation is phenomenal, and his touch and feel. We know that he's got incredibly raw power and talent from the baseline, and he's just got this talent that not many people possess naturally, does Nick. And we'll see how he gets on. But a lot of it will be down to, of course, not just the skill set, not just the body, but also the mindset. And so it'll be interesting to see how he does come out in 2025. And is he able to really make some big strides and recover some of that lost momentum, of course, that he had in 2022? It would have been nearly over 2 years since he's last set foot on court at the Australian Open anyway. So in terms of my champion, now I've gone for an interesting one here. Not for Novak Djokovic and not for Carlos Alcaraz. I've actually gone for world number one, Jannik Sinner. Now, you might say it's not particularly surprising given that he's the world number one, but I think what is surprising maybe is that I've picked him to win his first non-hard court slam. Now, he lost to Daniel Medvedev in the quarterfinal stage of Wimbledon this year and lost in 5 sets. He was definitely ill. Now, I'm not saying that's the reason he lost, but I'm sure it couldn't have helped. Medvedev played a really good match, it has to be said, and I think Sinner looked a bit flat. Could have been caused partly down to the illness, but I think we have to give credit where credit's due. Daniel Medvedev beat him. It was the only match where Medvedev did come out on top the whole year versus Sinner. Sinner dominated the head-to-head against Medvedev, and I think he got sick of seeing Sinner's name by the end of the year, if I'm being honest. But I do think that Sinner will win Wimbledon. I think he's got the game for it. We saw him, one of the biggest, I guess, runs in Grand Slams was at Wimbledon, and he's before he won the Australian Open this year, and I imagine he's going to want to win the title at SW19 because he definitely has the game for it. Like he's bulked up the serve so much. He's got really potent, flat, penetrating ground strokes like a Djokovic on the forehand and backhand, but hits the ball even harder. The slice can be improved, it has to be said. But if you look at Djokovic's style of play, Sinner is becoming more and more like him, and I think that probably puts him in good stead to win a Wimbledon title, Jannik, that is. And his defensive capabilities, his sliding skills on grass, I mean, he's just an incredible athlete. He's added the drop shot to his game. His touch and feel at the net is much better. So I think everything is trending in the right direction, for me anyway, to pretty confidently say that I can see him winning Wimbledon. Now, could Alcaraz go back-to-back? Of course he could. And could Djokovic come back and win it? Yes. But if I'm being honest, out of those 3 players, there aren't many elite grass court players. And you could argue that maybe Sinner at the moment hasn't proven that. Djokovic and Alcaraz are, you'd say Sinner just below, maybe Medvedev with him potentially. But everyone else, you can't really say that about them. If I'm being completely frank, there's not really anyone else to talk about. You could talk about Kyrgios. He's made 1 Wimbledon final. Is that really enough to put him in that conversation? I'm not sure. Is he dangerous? Yes, that's why I picked him as my dark horse, but I don't think he will be classed as an elite grass court player unless he makes another deep run or wins the title in 2025. So, look, I mean, elite grass court players are hard to come by at the moment anyway on the ATP Tour. The US Open. Now, the US Open is an interesting one. So far we've gone for Australian Open, Sinner, Roland Garros, Djokovic, Wimbledon, Sinner. And I've gone for someone who you're probably thinking, come on, Fazan, you have to pick him at some point. Champion, and I'll go champion first, is Carlos Alcaraz. So I've gone for what I'm sure a lot of people, they may have it in different orders. They may have gone for just Sinner and Alcaraz to split the Grand Slams as they did in 2024. Maybe they've gone for Djokovic as well and Alcaraz and Sinner to win in some sort of combination. That I think is going to be the most common predictions. I think maybe my picks of who I've got to win which Grand Slam might be slightly left field, let's say, to the norm. But I've gone for US Open and champion Alcaraz, and I'll tell you why. This year, of course, he had the Olympics. I think that definitely played a part. He's won the US Open in 2022. And my feeling is that Alcaraz will win it in 2025. And the reason why I think he will win it is because he's talked a lot about managing his schedule better and not burning out towards the back end of the year. And I think we've maybe seen that with that loss against Van der Zand and Schulp at the US Open. And that was after, of course, the heartbreaking loss at the Olympics. So my thinking is that he will potentially not win the Australian Open, might get frustrated by Sinner there. At Roland Garros, either he'll lose to Djokovic or maybe even Sinner, maybe even Zverev. At Wimbledon, it's difficult to see who he loses to, really. I think he'd have to lose to Sinner at Wimbledon. There's not really any other players. He could lose to a big hitter, big server. That's possible at Wimbledon, of course. Maybe someone like a Shelton on grass. That could happen potentially. I don't know. But the US Open, I think, look, it's a slightly slower hard court. I do think it's the best opportunity he has to win a hard court slam out of the Australian Open and the US Open. And I've gone for him. I think he'll break the stranglehold that Sinner has on the hard court slams. And I've gone for him to win the title in America. The dark horse I've gone for is Ben Shelton. I think, he's obviously had quite an up and down start to his career. Generally more positive than negative, of course, but maybe hasn't kicked on as much yet as some people would have expected. I think for me, it's probably expected what's happened so far. I see him, though, making another potential deep run like he did. It would have been now 2 years ago. Well, a year ago now, sorry, even, when he made the semi-finals of the US Open and lost to Djokovic. I could definitely see a similar run this year. Of course, we saw Fritz make the final of the US Open this year and TFO make the semis. So I can see Shelton doing something similar. And I've actually gone for another American for my interesting storyline, and it's Sebastian Korda. I've gone for Sebastian Korda. If fit, I think he will make a deep run at the US Open. I think it will be an eye-opening run for the rest of the tour. I'm a real big advocate for the talent that Seb Korda possesses. There's definitely some question marks around the conditioning, the physicality. I know he's obviously had some ops and some injuries. I'm hoping by the US Open he'll be fully fit, he'll be firing, and he'll be potentially making some sort of groundbreaking run at the US Open where people really look up, pay attention, and think, okay, this guy's a danger, because I don't think we've quite seen that yet from him, and we should do with someone of his potential. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Remember to hit that like button. Do subscribe if you are new, and do leave a rating or review if you're listening on a podcast platform. Let me know your Grand Slam predictions below, your champion and dark horse at least for each Grand Slam. Look, I mean, it was very tough for me. I could have gone so many different ways. These are early predictions. They can definitely change as the season starts, because I, of course, do my draw preview and prediction video for each and every single Grand Slam. And the draw has such a big effect on my predictions, so we'll see what happens in the draw and also how people look form-wise going into Grand Slams. But these are my initial thoughts anyway, as we wrap up the 2024 season and look ahead to the 2025 one. See you guys soon.